I was asked to curate an exhibition for the Varley Gallery following my exhibition. My work, I'm primarily an artist, and my work is very focused on beauty. It follows an aesthetic of beauty. I have a great belief in the phenomenal object. So I'm going to start by just giving an introduction to the philosophy of beauty. Beauty, I think, can be said to reside in that common cliche in the eyes of the beholder. And this means that beauty is a very personal idea. One thing that I think we could probably pare it down to is the fact that beauty is aligned with a sense of the positive. It's also very necessary to have an idea of cognizance in order to be able to appreciate and recognize beauty. There's a theoretician, his name is Roger Fry, and whenever, by the way, as I'm talking today, I'm going to be just referring to my notes when I have references, because I'd rather the references were very, specifically quoted than just my memory of them. So the first that I wanted to talk about was the Roger Fry's quote, and he talks about the fact that within the animal realm, we all have an instinctive reaction to sensible objects. And animals have only this instinctive reaction to sensible objects. And the idea of this would be, for instance, that an animal, in terms of recognizing food, understands food through a series of perceptions. The perception of sight, the perception of smell, the perception of hearing, perhaps if there's a hunting aspect to that. We, as humans, have an extra sight, and he talks about this double sight. In my exhibition here at the Varley, I did a painting. It was called Earth, and it was the three realms, and Earth had on it a head that was, when you looked at the head from a distance, you saw a man with a mustache. But you could also go over to it, and you could switch it around, so that the being, man, who was the center of the earthly realms, actually had the possibility of double sight. And the idea of the double sight was that you had the immediate perception, as does the animal, but you also had the umbrella perception of the idea of being able to imagine, the idea of being able to imagine the infinite, being able to imagine things that aren't recognized through a reaction to a sensible object. So beauty is very much, I believe, resting within this realm. The philosophy of beauty goes back a long time. If you think if we can, I sort of started around the time of Plato, who had the idea of the utopian dream. The utopian dream for Plato was based on logic. And he actually banished fine arts from this utopian dream, in the sense that it was too illogical. It didn't follow in terms of a balance. Now, another way that beauty can be aligned and understood is in terms of balance, in terms of an evenness, in terms of harmony. And throughout the classical tradition, this beauty and this harmony was very much cited and striven for. The dictionary definition of beauty, and this I've got to actually consult as well, is the quality, production, or expression, or realm of that which is beautiful. That's the dictionary definition for art, not for beauty. The dictionary definition for art. So at one time, beauty and art were very much identified together. And we can look at the time of the Renaissance, when there was a common narrative. Art was at the behest of the ideas of the people. It was a way of being able to translate those realms which we weren't able to understand on our own through fine arts. This common narrative primarily was centered within our Western tradition, historical tradition, which is primarily what I'm focusing on here, in terms of our relationship to the church and a relationship to all of the various different beings that related to the church. And this was usually seated within an aesthetic of beauty, because this was talking about a higher realm. So therefore, fine arts, being aligned with beauty, being aligned with a common realm, it made sense. But gradually, fine arts changed. And if we can think about in the Renaissance, in the time of the common narrative of riding on a bus, where we've got a long pole on the bus and everybody's got their hand on that pole, and as the motion of the bus goes, they all sway in the same kind of a rhythm because they're all connected to that same pole. This is what it was like during the Renaissance, when everybody's ideas of how to transcend into the spiritual realm within the Western world followed within quite a common line. And we all had stories which we all knew in common. So then you come to the time of when everything kind of got mixed up. And there was, it happened at a logical time as well. We were quite aligned with the common narrative up until the time when our ideas of that utopian realm that Plato had once talked about were definitely shook up. And that was probably during the time of the First and the Second World War. So no longer was this utopian dream really out there in a palpable form in terms of society working for itself. So people got off the common narrative. And all of a sudden we're not all hanging onto the same pole on the bus. Instead, we're all hanging onto those little floppy things instead. So everybody's got their own little individual strap which they're clinging to. And it could mean different things for different people. So, as well, the world is in a time of unrest now. And you can look to literature for examples, and you can look to fine arts for examples. One of my favorite, and personally by me most quoted, ideas of looking towards literature is Yeats's poem, The Second Coming, which talks about the fact that perhaps there will be a new unifying spiritual force that's going to come in and help to unite humanity, bring back into order the society that has fallen into disrepair. And so he talks about the second coming, the second Christ, the second spiritual savior, but he's not so sure that what's coming is actually going to be a positive force. So the last line in his poem is, "What rough beast is it we see slouching towards Bethlehem to be born?" So in times of great unrest, political, social, intellectual unrest, in times of war, and other times in times of extreme capitalist competition, the idea of beauty falls a little bit behind. So we had, during the war, expressionism, post-expressionism, impressionism, all of the various different isms that came into being, like those little straps on the bus, that people were individually hanging on to, individually relating to. There wasn't a common theme, a common spirituality that was running through it. And beauty definitely ended up getting sort of pushed to one side. Beauty was no longer fashionable, was no longer in favor. Other things took over. Expressionism took over, abstract expressionism. And when you think about what abstract expressionism is about, it's essentially about the gesture or the mark of the individual. So that's an individual as opposed to a harmonizing, communicating aspect that takes over. And beauty became a little bit soft and pink and fluffy and feminine in comparison to this kind of masculine bravado and assertion of the personality. Also, there was not only this great freedom of expression in terms of the actual gesture and expressing of the individual, there was also, all of a sudden, the various different mediums that everybody was using. And of course, with the advent of modernism, people were looking towards the mediums rather than necessarily looking towards the meaning. There wasn't a sense of common meaning. So that got people a little mixed up as well. And I think that, and also banned beauty, pushed beauty off to one side, because we weren't sure where beauty was residing in fine arts.